Hey Toby, I hope you're well. Just putting together this API video to show you how the API keys that we looked at previously within the portal UI translate into allowing people to make requests to the actual provider API. So the first thing I'm going to do is just log in as an admin user. So this is an admin for a service provider company, and grab out some API keys. So in we go, grab our API keys. So you see you've got client ID and client secret. Now the way they're used is on custom headers for all requests to the API. And essentially those keys say, hey, this user is in a trusted environment and allows us to match them back to an organization. So the API keys are organization specific, not user specific, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. But what that means is with the two keys, we can kind of validate that there's an organization that has these API keys, and we can get the details of that organization. Obviously, these keys should only be used in server-side context. The context, this should never be sort of exposed with client-side code, so people shouldn't be bunging this on the back of weird web apps or anything to integrate. This should be in sort of secure back-end systems that they have their own sense check over the top of, if possible. So where do we put those? So this is documented in the Swagger stuff, but it's much easier to see it here. So this is an API client. I'm using one called Insomnia, but you could use Postman or Apiary or any of the others that people do use for this sort of stuff. So we've got two headers, X client ID and X client secret. You'll see these are just with a blue blob, and that's because they're coming from my environment variables. But when I hover over it here, you'll see that that is the same client ID as on the right hand side, and when I hover the client secret, it's exactly the same as on the right there. And I'm just running this all locally, so this is making a request to localhost. In the staging environment, that would be api.bbdh.dev/v1, and that would be the stub for all the requests. As it is, I'm just sort of running this locally for testing. So gone and got our API keys. We know where to put them now. So X client ID, X client secret, just set it on every request and they're away. So we'll go ahead and open up the Swagger documents. I'm not going to go through the Swagger docs in too much detail because I think we kind of went through that previously. And obviously it's kind of translates back to TM Forum and the on API work anyway. The only bit that's maybe a bit different is we've kind of got these authenticate workflows. Now, I sort of touched on this a bit before. The API keys are at an organization level, so we know that this is the organization making the request and these are their keys and that's all valid. But what we don't know is who's making the request. So in due course, you know, the API is going to allow people to do all sorts of things with orders and tickets. Potentially, we'll also we've kind of called it provider API, but it's a general API. So in due course, we might also allow network operators to use the same API to upload bulk accesses or services into the system. And obviously we need to do some permission checking that is potentially more granular than just, hey, this organization can add data to this organization. We need to check a user can do it. So we've got an authenticate workflow. It's really lightweight, but the idea would be that they have a user in their system. They trust that they can do the thing in this system, so they can go ahead before the first call to our API and make an authenticate call. And what that means is they can just pass that user's email address, and when they send it, they get back an access and a refresh token. That access token can then be attached to all subsequent requests and allows us as BroadbandHUB to know who that user is so that we can associate orders and tickets and responses to that user, but also allows us to check their individual permission levels as set per our permission matrix, because otherwise we are going to be delegating the access control to our systems to a third party, which becomes just very dangerous, or you end up with a very open API, which is also very dangerous. So then we can take that token and we could post it along to log out. So we just paste it in here and it would log that user out. I'm not going to do that. or we can paste the token in here, the refresh token, and we can go ahead and get a new set of access and refresh. So when they expire, you can just go ahead and refresh. The refresh token's valid for a lot longer than the access. I think the access expires every 2 hours, whereas the refresh lasts like 7 days. So it saves them having to constantly log in. They can just refresh sessions on users. So we've now got an access token. So what do we do with the access token? Well, in a very similar way to the headers we're using for making the individual calls, we can also set a bearer authentication header. So again, this is an environment variable, but what it's doing is setting a bearer header with the token that came back, the access token. So that will now go along with all the other headers, X-Client ID and X-Client Secret, with each request, so that we know who's making the request. Well, first of all, we know which organisation is making the request, and then we know which user within the organisation is responsible for each individual one, so we can then perform permission checking at that granular level. And it saves us then having to associate too many permissions with the user, with the organisation level, which is something we wouldn't be doing in the UI, because we've assumed that one-to-one relationship of users and organizations. And then we can roll through the API and make our individual requests. I'm not going to go through all of that because I think I did a video previously for you on that, but do shout if there's any questions on this, and happy to jump on a call and go through anything in more detail that you need. Cheers, bye.